The story of World War II and the atrocities committed by Hitler and the Nazis is well known in the West. Less well known is how our ally, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, used the war to occupy Eastern Europe. He imposed the 50-year rule of terror on formerly free nations. Days before Hitler invaded Poland, launching World War II, he and Stalin secretly agreed to divide Eastern Europe between them. Stalin took the Baltic republics, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. He immediately sent Moscow-trained communists and his secret police to seize control of the governments. Together, they began to deport tens of thousands of Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians from their homes to the Siberian wilderness.
Mes 1940.
In the spring of 1941, after the Russians came to Lithuania, we had left our house and gone into hiding at my uncle's farm because we were afraid that Father was going to be arrested. The Soviets were arresting all the men, but on the night of the 13th, my father and brother Romas reached the farm. Later that same night, Lithuanian and Russian communists came and arrested us all. Red Army soldiers burst into the farmhouse. They ordered us to be ready to leave in 2 hours. Mother started to pack some of our things, but Father told her to stop it. They're going to kill us all anyway, he said. We were convinced that they were going to shoot us. We had practically nothing with us. I was in sandals and a summer dress. I was 11. They put us in a truck, and we drove to the railroad station. It was already very crowded. People were upset, crying, and then some soldiers grabbed my father and started to drag him away. I was hanging on to him, and I began screaming. I wouldn't let go of him. So they beat at us with their rifles and pulled me away. Then they pushed Mother and Romas and me toward other cattle cars. We were packed in with many women and children. But somehow I managed to slip out of the car. I wanted to look for my father. I ran along the train. By now, many more people had arrived at the station, shouting and looking for their own relatives. I was screaming for my father, "Velitis, Velitis!" And then from inside one of the cattle cars, packed with men, someone called to me. I stopped, and I peeked in through a crack. The men inside were all crowded together in the summer heat, like matches in a box. Their shirts were off, sweat running down their bodies. Father managed to squeeze through them to an opening, and he pulled off his wedding ring and slipped it to me through the slat. "You will need this to feed yourselves. Give this to your mother. You'll need it for food. And tell Romas, from now on, he's got to take care of the family." Then the soldiers grabbed me and dragged me back to the other car. That was the last time I ever saw my father.
Lithuanians knew that people were disappearing, but they didn't know where they were being taken or what was happening to them. No one ever expected that the Kremlin would actually begin to destroy Lithuania and would use these massive arrests, deportations, and terror to do it. They began preparing for the deportations in the autumn of 1940. The first thing they did was make a list, a register of all potential enemies. And the register came to over 350,000 names, so-called enemies. Including their families, that comes to half of Lithuania. Then in 1941, they decided to deport the ones they considered to be the most important enemies. So on the night of June 14th, after the families were arrested, they were brought to the railway stations. The men were separated and shipped in cattle cars to the Gulag, slave labor camps, and the women and children were sent into the wilderness in Siberia. These deportations had a traumatic effect on the country. Everyone had someone taken away from them. No one knew what had happened to them. And after such massive disruptions in their lives, the people were prepared to welcome anyone who would rescue them from this Soviet terror. What happened in 1941 was all planned in Moscow. And after World War II, as the Soviets returned to Lithuania and the Baltic states, the people who ran the first deportations came back with even more schemes for terror in order to finish the restructuring they had started.
The Soviets ruled by fear, and the fear was of the secret police and their spies. The fear of being arrested, taken to secret police headquarters, and being interrogated for days, weeks, and even months. In many cases, the arrested never returned to their homes. It was impossible to find out what happened to missing loved ones. Before long, everyone had someone taken away. People lived in terror of the police showing up in their neighborhood, knocking on the door of their apartment or house.
In 1940 they came and took my father, and we had no idea what happened to him. He just disappeared and was gone. My mother and grandmother and 5 of us children were left behind. I was the oldest, 9. My mother was hysterical. The baby was just 2 weeks old, and he died soon afterwards, maybe of shock. Then, one day in 1946, I was away from the house, and my mother had gone to the KGB jail to bring food to my brother, who had been arrested. That day when we were gone, they came and took away my grandmother and my baby brother and sisters. They were deported to Siberia. I thought my mother was going to lose her mind. My baby brother and sisters and grandma were in Russia for 9 months. When they returned, they were so sick and starving, almost dead. Mother didn't recognize them at all. And then again, on top of all this suffering, in the spring of 1948,